Okay, today we're beginning with the Ming Dynasty, and if you remember, the Ming Dynasty is in response to the Yuan Dynasty, which was controlled by the Mongols. So the Ming Dynasty is going to be very focused on what is Chinese. So we begin with Chu Yuanchang, who was an orphan and he was a peasant, and he wants to be thought of as the savior of China, saving them from the Mongols. And so he also is kind of like a Robin Hood figure. He didn't want to hurt the poor, he just wants to get to the Mongols. And so eventually he takes over, and his imperial family is going to be his peasant family that he elevates to nobility. They get all kinds of new rank and stipends, so money, but they had no responsibility. His generals, life is pretty good for them. They live in the capital, and they help to create the nobility of the Ming Dynasty. The gentry don't like Chu Yuanchang very well. He doesn't like them at all because they're everything that he's not. They're already educated, they're already used to money, and he's not. They tended to be scholars, and he's not. So with the gentry, he would have exams in order to determine their degree and status in his government. It was not hereditary, and so in a way we kind of get some fairness and competitiveness in China. The laws are going to widen the gap even further between the rich and the poor. You had sumptuary laws where it determined, depending on your class, what you could wear, what you could eat, what kind of housing you had, what kind of transportation you could use. You also had criminal laws. There was one set for the rich and one set for the poor, and typically the poor got the short end of the deal. In taxes, the rich had to pay very little taxes and the poor had to pay tons of taxes. So the gentry actually weren't doing so bad under Chu Yuanchang, but they didn't like the fact that he kind of made it more competitive. They thought they just should get these jobs. Now, the bureaucracy that he creates is the best in the world at the time. He had basically three branches of government: a civil, a military, and a censorial. The civil government dealt with the everyday laws and that kind of stuff, the day-to-day mechanics of a government. The military branch is dealing, obviously, with the military. And the censorial made sure that the government is honest and effective, because remember, that's one of the 5 principles of Chinese way of life. Now, the population is going to benefit the society, the military. Your sons go into the military to help pay back to society. Artisans would pay in products, the commoners would pay lots of money, all kinds of stuff. Well, eventually the emperor gets old and he gets kind of paranoid that people are out to get him. And so he has a series of purges, and purges are where you get rid of people. Between 20 and 30,000 people are going to be killed because he's worried that they're trying to take his spot. He will eventually end the office of the prime minister because, again, he's worried that he's trying to take his spot. And so he reorganizes the entire government. He gets rid of all of the top office holders. Instead, the emperor is going to make all the decisions because he couldn't trust anyone else. He also couldn't trust his own family. He sets up peripheral states, which are little tiny areas, little tiny kingdoms on the edges of the Chinese empire. And he sends his sons up to these peripheral states, up to the border, to watch the Mongols. Each of them basically develops their own kingdom, and they get used to ruling. And so when their father dies, they begin to fight for the throne because each one thinks that they deserve it. So a civil war is going to break out. When Chu Yuanchang dies, a civil war breaks out, and his sons are fighting for it. And one of his sons wins. Young Lo is going to win the war. And he decides to rewrite history, that there was no civil war. He didn't kill off his brothers. He was chosen. He's a hero. All kinds of stuff. So, the victors of war get to write the history kind of thing. But Young Lo is going to have a very aggressive foreign policy. He makes contacts with barbarians and begins to trade with them. Ching Ho, which is his top advisor, he was a Muslim eunuch, and he is going to be sent on missions of trade and exploration. The ships of the Chinese at this time are the best in the world, and so he goes around and he gathers tribute from tiny countries for China's greatness. It's not very profitable because even though he sends out ships, he doesn't send out a military with them. And so Ching Ho goes to like Korea and says, you should pay tribute to China because China is so great. And Korea says, don't think so. And Ching Ho doesn't have the army to back it up. Well, eventually, what we'll see happening in the Ming Dynasty is that the eunuchs are going to become somewhat of a problem. Eunuchs were very powerful, and they had access to everything. Now, eunuchs are castrated males, and so they were put in charge of watching over the women of the royal household. And so, like I said, they had access to everything. They knew what the women were talking about. They were also involved in the male side of it, of what the king and the princes and everybody is talking about as well. But they're not considered to be a threat because they're not really men in the eyes of the king, or in the eyes of the nobles even. The Mongols will also become a problem. They begin to attack on the northern border. And there will be a rebellion. The people are unhappy because they have to pay so much taxes. They didn't like that. The rising standards of living for the elite, they were doing really well, but that's because they're living off the money provided by the poor, by the commoners. And so towards the end of the Ming Dynasty, we get a very weak emperor. And so that means you're going to have rebellion and revolt by the peasants. Mandate of heaven. Then we get the Qing Empire. And the Qing Empire, Qing means pure. So this is supposed to purify the empire. And what happens is that the Manchus come in. And the Manchus were thought of as barbarian. They're northern Chinese. They're not Mongolian, but they're the next thing to it. And so Nurhaci is the leader of Manchuria, and he unites together the Manchu people, and he uses something called the banner system. And the banner system is going to unite the families under different colored banners. So it's kind of like having your own sports team, sort of. It's kind of like that. But all of them would be loyal to the Manchu emperor. Now, Nurhaci is also a Confucianist, and his capital is in Mukden. And so how does he get in control of all of China? Well, the Manchus are invited in by the Ming Dynasty to settle the peasant revolts. And so the Manchus come in. They're in the minority. They're only 2% of the population. The rest of the Chinese are 98% of the population. But they're the ones that are going to be in control, kind of like when the Mongols were in control. Remember, the Mongols were highly outnumbered, yet their military was so strong that people respected them. Same thing with the Manchus. They're considered barbarians, but because of that characterization, they're also very highly respected. Well, the goal of the Manchu is to create a good government with order and tranquility. No more fighting and rebelling. And so that's what they want to try and accomplish. And how they do that is by creating administrative two-man teams. One of the men would be Manchu and one would be Chinese, so that everybody's needs would be addressed. And they would have a 3-year rotation, which is good because you'd always be getting new blood in and people would have new ideas and new ways of doing things, but it's bad because they don't gain a whole lot of experience. They're only there for 3 years. The gentry are going to be treated a little bit differently under the Manchus than they had been under the Ming Dynasty, especially in terms of the exams for the inspectors, on the ones that are watching government. There would be a different exam for the Manchu and a different exam for the Chinese. Now, the military, the Manchu are going to be at the top level, and the Chinese are going to be kind of like the foot soldiers. They extend that banner system to the rest of China. They expand it to more levels. But there's different training and different equipment for the Chinese than there is for the Manchu. But the Manchu also helped China to develop better communication. They also developed postal stations and better roads. Now, the Manchu identity, they were very worried about losing their identity to the Chinese people, and so they're going to limit immigration between China and Manchuria. They also will retain the imperial hunting grounds that no Chinese could come into. And intermarriage was highly discouraged between the Manchu and the Chinese. A way to easily identify the Chinese was a Manchu idea. What they decide is that they're going to required the Chinese to wear a queue. And a queue is a ponytail or a braid worn on the back of the head that would help you to identify them as Chinese and not Manchu. The justification for this is the Manchus are going to basically tell the Chinese that we want to honor and continue the Ming traditions, and we want to restore Chinese glory. And in order to do that, we will admit that you are superior. And in order to show your superiority, you will wear this queue, you will wear this braid, this ponytail. Well, the Manchus are very, very successful in China. For 150 years, they are in charge, and China becomes the richest empire in the world. Its population increases, and as its population increases, its standard of living also increases, and that's typically not something that happens. They saw a lot of agricultural improvements. The government will require irrigation and flood prevention, canals, land reclamation, plus introducing new seeds, new fertilizers, and new farming techniques. Their trade is also going to rapidly increase. Their trade with Southeast Asia will increase. There's a growing number of merchants and port cities in China, and this provides for a good balance of trade where you sell more and you buy less, which means you're making money. Eventually, we get Emperor Kangxi, who is an able administrator. His emphasis is going to be on honesty and harmonious partnerships between not only the Chinese and the Manchu, but also with any trading nations that they were going into commerce with. He put a permanent limit on taxes on the poor. Among his accomplishments, he was a patron of the arts, and so he helps to improve the quality of artisans and imperial pottery and art. He also will help out education and scholarship. Schools for the poor are going to be built, but they're only for boys, and it's only for those that were deemed worthy. He also will have traveling scholars that go around to smaller villages and help to teach morality and virtue. And he allows in also Jesuit tutors and Catholic missionaries from Europe. Because of that, Western relations are going to, for a while, improve between China and Europe. But the Pope will eventually condemn Confucianism, and because of that, the Western missionaries are going to be tossed out of China. Next, we get Emperor Chenglong, who was the grandson of Emperor Kangxi, and he's going to redistribute the land, and this increases his popularity because now the poor are getting more land. As a young man, he was very hardworking, and he had a very strong government. Among his accomplishments included the reprinting of classic literature of Chinese, and he also conquers the Mongols, he conquers Burma, he conquers Vietnam. And from all of these areas, he gets tribute, so more money coming into China. However, towards the end of his life, he goes into a decline. He begins to really love luxury, which, you know, if you're old and you've lived a good life, who doesn't want to have some luxury in their life? But it also leads to a very corrupt government. His government officials begin to skim off the top. They begin to squeeze the taxpayers. They start taking some of the tribute money. So all in all, there is going to be a decline in the Qing Empire.